Hello, I'm Rachel Patterson. I'd like to introduce you today to a book in the Moonbooks Pagan Portals series, Gods and Goddesses of England. This one's written by me. Absolutely loved writing this book. I do with all my books. The newest one's always the favourite. So let me tell you a little bit about what's included. I start with the history of humans, not the whole history, just a brief one. Then looking at the British Isles and how it was made up. There's a timeline, very brief, historic timeline. There's information about burials and monuments, including metals and offerings, because all of those can give us clues to how ancient people worship the gods. There is a brief trip round the Iron Age, the Celts, the Druids, the tribes of ancient Britain, which I think are quite important to all of this, the Romans, the Germanic tribes, the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, and finally the Vikings. Just little brief introductions to them all. Part 2 of the book is all about the gods and goddesses. I look at the pantheons. I look at all of the gods and goddesses that I could find information on. I also give you some details about how to make a connection with them. And then I introduce you specifically to several of the deities and how I work with them. For some of these deities, I've only been able to give little amounts of information. Some, there's more. For others, all we have is a record of their name. Sometimes all that was found was one inscription on a relic or a mention in an old manuscript. A lot of what we know came from the Romans, who documented the names of a lot of our native deities. Christian monks also recorded a lot of information. Bear in mind that these sources may well have been tainted by their own personal views and beliefs. When the Romans arrived in Britain, they liked to worship their gods with lots of grand ceremony, and they expected everyone else to do the same. Temples were built to honour their gods, such as Juno and Minerva. Deities that were worshipped in Britannia were often merged with the Roman gods, and such as Sulis becoming Sulis Minerva, Tutates becoming Mars Tutates. Eventually, the Romans and their trade partners also introduced gods from other countries, such as Astarte, Mithras Sol, and of course, Jesus Christ. Britain had many travellers from other countries, some just visiting, others stayed and made their home with us. Many of them brought their own deities with them, and some of them were even adopted by us. A lot of English native deities are only mentioned in one town, one city, or even just connected with one river. Perhaps because that was their only place of worship, although they did seem to revere the power and energy of rivers, or maybe any records or stories have been lost in the mists of time. Nature and the landscape seems to have inspired a lot of these gods and goddesses. They didn't have temples, they didn't build temples for their gods, they didn't worship inside. Their connection to deity was made through nature, often in sacred groves of trees or by sacred water. They would probably have also revered the gods of the sky, the sun, the moon as well, and fertility would also have played a big part in their spirituality. I've included as much information as I could find within my research. I've also added thoughts and insights from my own personal interpretation and experiences with them. Where possible, I have included the evidence from archaeological finds. Generally, these are from the Roman period, where they took on English deities as their own. Perhaps they felt it would be of benefit to them to worship the local gods. The fact they did take on the local deities helps us because it means we have a record of their names and areas they were worshipped in. It's certainly been a fascinating journey for me personally, and I hope you enjoy the adventure too.